Chapter 1. I thought lending my cabin to my sister for one quiet weekend would be harmless. Instead, I watched strangers flood my living room through my own security cameras, listened as my family told me to let it go, and realized that the woman they expected to pay for everyone else's mistakes had always been me. I did not scream. I did not destroy anyone. I simply stopped covering for her, and that decision changed everything. I am 40 years old now, and most days my life looks exactly the way people imagine stability should look. I manage operations for a mid-sized logistics and technology services company based out of Charlotte, the kind of place that moves quietly but touches everything. Warehouses, routing systems, contracts that only get noticed when something goes wrong. I am good at my job because I am calm under pressure and because I fix things before they break. When deadlines slip or teams stall, my name is the one that gets mentioned in meetings. I am the person who can handle it. That has been true for most of my adult life, not just at work. The cabin was the one place where that version of me did not exist. Tucked into the Blue Ridge Mountains, a few hours west of the city, it sat at the end of a narrow gravel road lined with trees that leaned inward like they were sharing secrets. I bought it in 2019, right before the world shut down, using savings I had built quietly over a decade of choosing responsibility over impulse. It was small but solid, with a wide front porch, a stone fireplace, and just enough distance from the nearest neighbor that the nights felt truly dark. No streetlights, no traffic noise, just wind and insects and the occasional owl. I never called it an investment out loud, even though technically it was. To me, it was proof. Proof that I could build something that belonged only to me. A place where no one needed anything from me. Where I did not have to smooth over tension or anticipate someone else's disappointment. When I was there, I slept deeper. I breathed slower. I remembered what it felt like not to be on call. My family knew all of this, even if they never said it back to me. My younger sister Lily was 34 and getting married in the fall. She had always moved through life a little louder than I did, a little faster, buoyed by the confidence that someone would catch her if she stumbled. Our mother had been that someone for as long as I could remember. My father, kind but conflict-averse, stayed on the sidelines, offering help only when asked and retreating when voices rose. In our family, peace was maintained by avoiding hard conversations, and I had learned early that being the reasonable one meant absorbing discomfort so others did not have to. So when Lily called me one afternoon in late summer, her voice bright and tight. At the same time, I already knew what was coming before she said the words. She told me she was overwhelmed. Wedding planning had taken over her life. She and her fiancé needed a quiet weekend away, just the two of them, to reset before the final stretch. She said my cabin would be perfect. She promised they would barely leave the porch. No friends, no noise, just rest. I listened, leaning back in my office chair, staring out at the parking deck across the street. I thought about the way my shoulders dropped every time I pulled into the cabin driveway. I thought about how few places I had that felt like mine. And then I thought about my mother's voice already forming in my head, reminding me that Lily was under a lot of stress and that I had always been good at understanding. I agreed, but I was clear. No gatherings, no guests, no exceptions. Lily laughed and said, of course, as if the idea of anyone breaking those rules was ridiculous. I repeated them anyway. She promised again. After we hung up, I sat there for a minute longer than necessary. There was a familiar heaviness in my chest, the kind that came when I did something out of obligation rather than instinct. I told myself I was being dramatic. It was just a weekend. I had the place insured. Lily was an adult. I needed to stop treating every request like a test of my boundaries. That night, back at my apartment, I packed my work bag for the next day and checked my calendar. Meetings, calls, the usual. The cabin weekend sat quietly in the background, already handed over, already out of my control. The first alert came the following evening while I was making dinner. A soft chime from my phone on the counter. Motion detected. I barely glanced at it. The cabin cameras were sensitive. Wind through the trees, a deer passing by. It happened all the time. 10 minutes later, another alert, then another. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up my phone. The live feed took a second to load. When it did, I saw light spilling out of the front windows. That was unusual. Lily had said they would arrive late, eat, and go to bed early. The porch light was on too, casting long shadows across the gravel. I told myself it meant nothing. Maybe they had decided to cook. Maybe they were unpacking. I switched to the saved footage and scrubbed back an hour. At first, it was just two figures, Lily and her fiancé, carrying bags inside. Then a third car pulled up. Then another. Headlights swept across the trees. People stepped out, laughing arms full of coolers and grocery bags. I watched as the timestamp ticked forward and the porch filled. Someone leaned against the railing. Someone else dragged a folding table from a trunk. I felt very still, like my body had decided to pause before my mind caught up. I checked the other camera, the one angled toward the living room. It had been installed years earlier after a string of break-ins in the area, positioned carefully to cover common spaces only. The screen showed movement everywhere, people crossing in front of the fireplace, bottles on the coffee table, music loud enough that I could see it in the way bodies moved. I counted, without meaning to. 6, 8, 12. The number kept climbing. My first reaction was not anger, it was recognition. That quiet click of understanding when something you hoped would be different turns out exactly the way it always has. I thought about the rules I had laid out so clearly. I thought about how easily they had been brushed aside. I thought about how familiar that felt. Another alert chimed. Motion detected. I set the phone down and leaned against the counter, staring at the wall. The smell of garlic burning in the pan went unnoticed. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that I should call Lily immediately, that I should shut this down before it got worse. Another voice, older and more practiced, reminded me how those calls usually went, how I ended up apologizing for making things awkward, how I was told I worried too much. I picked the phone up again and watched the feed for a few seconds longer. Someone raised a glass toward the camera, not knowing it was there. Someone else stumbled slightly, caught by a friend. It was not chaos yet, but it was headed there. I turned off the stove. I put my phone face down on the counter and stood there listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic through my open window. I felt heavy, but not surprised. I knew then that I would drive up to the cabin in the morning. I knew I would see the aftermath with my own eyes. What I did not know yet was what I would do after that. For the moment, all I could do was breathe and wait, aware that something had shifted, even if nothing had officially broken yet. Chapter 2. The drive up the mountain the next morning felt longer than it ever had before. The road curved tighter as the elevation rose, trees crowding in, close enough that the sky disappeared for long stretches. I kept the radio off. Every mile marker felt like a countdown I did not want to finish. When I pulled into the gravel turnout that led to the house, the quiet was immediate and jarring. No music, no laughter, just the sound of tires crunching and my engine ticking as it cooled. 2 unfamiliar cars were parked near the porch, their windows fogged from the night air. I sat behind the wheel for a moment longer than necessary, hands resting on my thighs, steadying myself before getting out. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the smell hit first. Stale beer, sweet liquor, something fried and forgotten. The living room looked lived in the wrong way, like a space that had been taken over rather than used. Empty bottles crowded the coffee table. A red plastic cup lay tipped on its side near the fireplace. The rug I had vacuumed the weekend before was dotted with dark stains that would not come out with a simple wipe. I walked through, slowly forcing myself not to rush, not to dramatize it in my own head. The kitchen counters were sticky. Someone had left a cabinet door hanging open. A chair had been dragged across the floor hard enough to leave a pale scratch in the wood. It was not destroyed. That was almost worse. It was careless, casual, the kind of damage that comes from assuming nothing will happen if you do not think too hard about it. In the bathroom, the hand towel I had folded neatly was crumpled on the floor, damp and gray. In the guest room, the bedspread was pulled half off the mattress, footprints marking the quilt. I took out my phone and began to take pictures one by one, not because I wanted to build a case yet, but because I knew myself well enough to know that memory softens things over time. By the time my sister came downstairs, I had reached the back porch. She looked tired, but not apologetic. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, makeup smudged beneath her eyes. She said my name like a greeting and a warning at the same time. I asked her how many people had been here. She waved a hand dismissive, saying it had not been that many, just friends stopping by. She said I was making it sound worse than it was. She pointed out that nothing was broken beyond repair. She reminded me that it was a celebration weekend, that she had needed the distraction. I told her I had been very clear about the rules. I said this calmly, even the way I had learned to speak when I wanted to be taken seriously without being accused of overreacting. She sighed and told me I was focusing on the wrong thing. She said the cameras made her uncomfortable, that it felt invasive to be watched. She said if I trusted her, I would not need them. She said she had not thought anyone would go that far. I waited for the apology that never came. Instead, she asked what I wanted her to do, now her tone sharp, already defensive. I said I needed her to acknowledge that she had crossed a line. She looked at me like I was speaking a language she did not recognize. That was when my phone rang. It was my mother. I stepped away from my sister and answered, already bracing myself. My mother did not ask how I was doing. She asked what was going on. She said my sister sounded upset. She asked if I was really planning to make a big issue out of a weekend that was supposed to be joyful. I told her what I had seen. I told her about the damage. I told her about the rules that had been ignored. My voice stayed steady, but my chest felt tight, like something was pressing inward. My mother interrupted, saying weddings were stressful, that people made mistakes, that family did not keep score the way strangers did. She reminded me that I had always been the one who could handle things, the one who did not need to make a scene. I asked her why no one was asking my sister to take responsibility. There was a pause on the line, brief, but telling. Then she said I was putting her in a difficult position. She said she did not want to take sides. She asked if I could just let it go for the sake of peace. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. My father called next. He listened quietly as I explained again. When I finished, he said it was unfortunate. He said these things happened. He said I had insurance, did I not? He suggested we chalk it up to bad luck and move on. Bad luck. I looked around the room again at the stains and the scratches and the emptiness where respect should have been. None of this felt accidental. My sister stood near the kitchen island, arms crossed, watching me. She said something about how she had always known I would react this way. She said I cared more about a house than about her. She said if I loved her, I would understand. I felt something shift, then sharper than anger, clearer than hurt. It was the realization that in this version of events, I was the only one expected to bend. I told her I needed time to think. I said I was not making any decisions that day. She scoffed, accusing me of dragging things out. I picked up my bag and walked outside, needing air. On the porch, I sat on the step and wrote notes in my phone. The stains, the scratches, the missing items. I did this not because I was ready to take action, but because it grounded me in something real. Each note was a small anchor against the rising tide of doubt. As I drove back down the mountain later that afternoon, my thoughts circled the same question over and over. Was I being unreasonable, or was I just tired of being reasonable all the time? By the time I reached the highway, I had my answer, even if I was not ready to say it out loud yet. Chapter 3. The next few days unfolded quietly, which somehow made everything feel louder. I went back to work on Monday morning and slid into my routine like nothing had happened. Emails, meetings, status updates. My calendar was full and my inbox even fuller. From the outside, I looked the same as always, capable, focused, unbothered. Inside, I was carrying the weight of that drive down the mountain. By midweek, the shift became noticeable. Not dramatic, just subtle enough that I could not ignore it. A pause in conversations when I walked into the break room, a glance that lingered half a second too long. Someone from accounting asked me if everything was okay at home, her voice careful, her curiosity poorly disguised as concern. I smiled and said yes. That evening, alone in my apartment, I finally opened my phone and scrolled through my sister's social media. The post had gone up the night before. A long paragraph about boundaries and control, about how painful it was to realize that someone you loved valued property more than people. She did not use my name, but she did not need to. Anyone who knew us could read between the lines. The comments were worse. People chiming in with sympathy, sharing stories of overbearing relatives praising her for standing up for herself during such a stressful time. I felt my face grow hot as I read. One comment mentioned cameras. Another suggested it was unhealthy to monitor family members. A third said something about trust being broken. I took screenshots, my hands steady now, in a way they had not been earlier in the week. I did not respond. I did not correct anything. I saved the post, the comments, the timestamps. The next day, a woman I barely knew from a neighboring department stopped me in the hallway. She tilted her head and said, "Weddings can bring out the worst in families." I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then said she had seen something online and hoped everyone would work it out. Her tone implied advice, but her eyes were curious. I thanked her and kept walking, my pulse loud in my ears. At lunch, I sat with Megan, the one person at work who knew me well enough to notice the cracks. She waited until we were alone before speaking. "You seem like you are carrying something heavy," she said. I told her the basics: the cabin, the weekend, the post. I did not show her the screenshots, but I did not have to. She listened without interrupting, her expression hardening with each detail. When I finished, she shook her head once. "Wanting boundaries does not make you the villain," she said. "It just makes you inconvenient to people who benefit from you having none." I laughed softly, more out of relief than humor. "I keep wondering if I should have handled it differently," I said. Megan looked at me for a long moment. "You handled it the way you always do," she said. "The difference is you stopped fixing it for everyone else." That stayed with me. I continued to collect what appeared in my periphery. Messages from extended family asking vague questions, a cousin sending a heart emoji and saying she hoped things calmed down soon. Nothing overt, nothing actionable, just enough to make me aware that a version of me was circulating that I had not authorized. I still did not respond publicly. Silence felt safer than arguing in a space designed to reward outrage. The message from Jasmine arrived late one night just as I was about to put my phone away. She introduced herself quickly, apologetically, and asked if she could talk. I recognized her name immediately. She had been at the cabin. I remembered her face from the footage, laughing near the porch railing, a drink in her hand. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. We spoke on the phone the next evening. She sounded nervous. She said she had gone back and forth about reaching out, worried she would make things worse. She said she could not shake the feeling that she had been complicit in something she did not understand at the time. "I thought it was Lily's place," she said. "She told everyone it was hers, that you were just being difficult." I closed my eyes. Jasmine explained that the mood had shifted late in the night, that people had started pushing boundaries because they thought there would be no consequences. She said she left early because something about it felt wrong. "I am sorry," she said. "I should have questioned it sooner." I thanked her, not because she owed me anything, but because the truth, when it finally arrives, deserves acknowledgement. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and let the quiet settle around me. The relief I expected did not come. Instead, there was a dull sadness, heavy and persistent. My family had dismissed my concerns. Strangers had believed a story that painted me as controlling, and it took someone with no stake in my life to tell me what should have been obvious to the people closest to me. That night I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it simply and began organizing everything. Photos from the cabin, video clips, screenshots of posts and comments, dates, times, names. I wrote short notes describing what each file contained, careful to stick to facts. No adjectives, no emotion. It felt strange turning something so personal into something so methodical, but it also felt grounding. I was no longer reacting, I was paying attention. Before going to bed, I looked at my phone one last time. There were no new messages from my sister. No apologies, no questions, just silence. I set the phone down and turned off the light. For the first time since the weekend, I felt steady, not resolved, not vindicated, just steady enough to know that whatever came next would not be guided by guilt or obligation. I did not yet know where this path would lead, only that I had stopped walking in circles. Chapter 4. I started by looking at the numbers because numbers felt safer than feelings. The estimates came in one by one over the next week. A flooring repair company quoted more than I expected to sand out the deeper scratches. An upholstery cleaner shook his head and said one of the stains on the rug might never fully lift. The broken porch railing would need replacement, not patching. None of it was catastrophic on its own. Taken together, it added up to more than inconvenience. I called my insurance company and listened as the representative explained deductibles and premium increases in a calm, rehearsed voice. Filing a claim would cover part of the cost, but it would also follow me. My rates would go up. My record would change. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the wall while the math settled in. This was not a one-time mess. It was a decision point. By early September, I had a folder full of receipts, photos, and notes. Dates lined up. Damage documented. I still had not told anyone what I was considering, but the thought had formed clearly enough that I could not ignore it anymore. I scheduled a consultation with a civil attorney named Mark Bennett, whose office sat above a coffee shop downtown. He did not rush me. He asked questions. He listened. I told him everything. The cabin, the rules, the footage, the aftermath, the social media posts, the witness who had reached out. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "This is not about punishment," he said. "This is about responsibility." He explained the options in plain language. A demand letter first, a formal request for repayment, documentation attached, if that failed, a small claims filing. No theatrics, no drawn-out battle, just a legal record that said this happened and someone was accountable. I asked him if it would be excessive. He shook his head. "Doing nothing sends its own message," he said. "You need to decide which message you can live with." I left his office feeling heavier and clearer at the same time. My mother found out 2 days later. She called me in the afternoon, her voice tight before I had even said hello. She asked if it was true that I was talking to a lawyer. I told her yes. She did not pause. "This is cruel," she said. "You were talking about taking your own sister to court." I told her I was talking about asking Lily to take responsibility for what she allowed to happen. I said I had tried every other route first. She said I was blowing things out of proportion. She said families handled things privately. She said this would humiliate everyone involved. I asked her why humiliation mattered more than accountability. She told me I was being rigid. She said I had always struggled with letting things go. My father did not say much when I told him. He sighed and said he wished things had not come to this. He said he hoped we could all calm down and talk it through. He did not say Lily was wrong. He did not say I was right. He said nothing at all that changed my position. Lily called me that night. She cried, loudly. She said I was ruining her life. She said her wedding was weeks away, and that this stress could make everything fall apart. She said she had not meant for any of this to happen and that I was being unforgiving. "How could you do this to me?" she said. "I am your sister." I listened. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I said quietly that being my sister did not excuse what happened. I said I was not punishing her. I was asking her to make it right. She hung up on me. The call from her future mother-in-law came the following morning. Her name was Diane Parker. I had met her only a handful of times. Polite, reserved, the kind of woman who paid attention to details and expected others to do the same. She told me she had worked in human resources for most of her career and that she believed in dealing with issues directly. "I did not want to get involved," she said, "but I cannot pretend this is not serious." She told me her son had admitted that things had gotten out of hand that weekend, that he had seen the damage the next morning and said nothing, that he had hoped it would all be smoothed over. "I raised him to know better," she said, "and I raised him to take responsibility when he does not." She apologized to me, not as a formality, but as a statement. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the stack of papers in front of me. Something had shifted. Lily was no longer the only one being protected. The story she had been telling was beginning to crack under its own weight. That afternoon, Mark sent me a draft of the demand letter. It was factual, clean, no accusations, just dates, damages, and a request for repayment. I read it twice before signing. Dropping it in the mailbox felt heavier than I expected. My hand lingered on the metal slot before I let go. The small claims filing came a week later. Online, straightforward, a few clicks that carried more weight than any argument I had ever had with my family. I sat in my car afterward, engine off, phone in my lap. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired, but beneath the exhaustion was something steadier. I had stopped covering for her. For the first time, the consequences were no longer mine alone to absorb. Chapter 5. The hearing took place on a gray morning in early winter, the kind where the sky feels low and everything sounds quieter than usual. I arrived early and sat on a wooden bench outside the small courtroom, my coat folded across my lap. I had expected my hands to shake, but they did not. What I felt instead was a steady pressure, like something heavy had finally settled into its proper place. Lily arrived with her fiancé a few minutes later. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders drawn inward, her confidence dulled by weeks of uncertainty. She did not look at me. He nodded once, stiff and formal, then took a seat beside her. When our case was called, we stepped forward together. The judge was calm and efficient, the kind of person who had heard every version of every excuse and learned to listen only for what mattered. She asked questions. She reviewed the documents. She watched the video clips without expression. The footage played quietly on the screen, people moving through my living room, bottles on my table, laughter echoing where silence had been promised. I did not look at Lily while it played. I did not need to. Jasmine spoke when she was asked, her voice steady. She described what she had been told about the cabin, about ownership, about permission. She said she would not have gone if she had known the truth. Her words were simple, unembellished, and devastating in their clarity. Lily tried to explain. She said she had not meant for things to get out of hand. She said she had assumed I would understand. She said she had been under stress. The judge listened, then asked one question that cut through everything. "Did you have permission to host that gathering?" There was a pause long enough to be unmistakable. "No," Lily said. That was all it took. The decision came shortly after. Lily was ordered to repay a portion of the damages and cover specific repair costs. The amount was fair. It did not ruin her. It did not save me. It simply acknowledged reality. As we stood to leave, Lily finally looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but there was something else there too. Something like disbelief that this had actually happened. I nodded once. Not in triumph, not in forgiveness, just acknowledgement. The fallout did not arrive all at once. It unfolded in pieces. The wedding was postponed, then quietly canceled. Invitations stopped circulating. Conversations changed. Some relatives stopped calling me altogether. Others reached out in awkward ways, unsure of what to say. My mother was distant, polite, but careful. My father remained neutral, which felt like its own kind of loss. Lily did not speak to me for months. I missed the version of my family that had existed before all of this, even though I knew now that it had been built on something fragile. I grieved it the way you grieve a place you can never return to, even if it was never truly safe. What surprised me was how light everything else felt. The cabin repairs were finished by spring. I drove up alone one weekend and stood on the porch, breathing in the cool air. The scratches were gone, the stains lifted, the railing stood straight and solid. The place felt like mine again. At work, nothing changed. If anything, I felt more present, more certain. Megan noticed. "You look different," she said one afternoon. I asked her how. "Like you stopped carrying something that was never yours," she said. I thought about that later, sitting in my quiet apartment, the windows open, the city humming below. I thought about how many times I had absorbed consequences for other people, how often I had mistaken endurance for kindness. I did not win anything in that courtroom. There was no celebration, no satisfaction. What I gained was quieter and more enduring. I stopped losing pieces of myself to keep other people comfortable. Lily and I may speak again someday, or we may not. I have learned that love does not require self-erasure, and family does not excuse harm. If you have ever been the one expected to bend so others do not have to, I hope you ask yourself one question. At what point does holding the peace cost you too much?